Hey, I'm Tom.
And I'm John.
And we're the co-founders of Handsome Frank Illustration Agency.
In this series, we'll be sitting down and talking to our illustrators, finding out more about them, their artistic process, and the creative industry we work in.
Welcome to our podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Handsome Frank podcast.
So, we've just spoken to Toby.
Yeah.
I never know whether we should record these intros before.
I think it's weird because if you do it before, then you have to kind of remember that it's past tense. I don't know, it gets a bit odd. But yeah, it's a busy week for us. We've got our new website going live.
We have.
It's been a journey, one hell of a journey getting that website live. But yeah, it's finally happening. So keep your eyes out for that.
So yeah, that's very exciting. New website. What else is going on? Trying to arrange a Christmas party, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, and also getting invites again to design festivals and talking.
And going in to see clients. So yeah, things seem to be getting back to normal. But yeah, it was really nice to hang out with Toby today and have a chat about his work and his process. He is somebody we've been working with only since January. We've known him for a long time, but we've only had the pleasure of representing him since the start of this year. But we've had a really busy, interesting year that I think has produced some really exciting work, a lot of which we've not been able to share yet, and hopefully we can next year. But yeah, it was a really kind of wide-ranging chat about him, how he's ended up doing what he's doing, aspects of his work. Anything to add, Tom?
It's just been lovely once again to meet up in person, have a nice chat, and yeah, it's all good. Right, enjoy the podcast, everyone. Hello, everybody. We are here again for another podcast.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
Who are you?
I'm Tobias Hall.
Nice to meet you.
It's always so strange introducing myself as Tobias. I never do that in outside of illustration life.
No, it's a funny one, and
yeah.
I think I think there's something I haven't realised when I listen back to these podcasts is that we don't really introduce too much the illustrator and the actual work that you do.
Uh-huh.
So let me start. How would you describe your work?
I would say it's quite varied. So there's a lot of lettering in there, and that's certainly how I sort of got started. Nowadays, there's a lot more illustration going on as well. I think the thing that ties it all together is it's all sort of handmade. So there's that sort of hand-drawn element to it. The illustration stuff is what I would describe as sort of like a woodcut style, although they're not actually woodcuts. It's all created digitally. And then the lettering stuff mostly is kind of inspired by a lot of vintage style lettering, but it's been brought up to date somehow with a palette or whatever it might be.
Nice.
I should probably speak now as well, shouldn't I?
Yeah, I was going to say, John is also here.
Hi, John.
I've been very quiet.
John, what's that noise in the background?
Yeah, well, we should do a couple of disclaimers, shouldn't we? So we're in Toby's place today. We're in Loughton, which I drove to. Tom got the tube up.
Yeah, well, I almost got off at Leighton.
Oh, you wouldn't be the
and
first.
Leytonstone.
Yeah.
And then knocked on the wrong house.
Yes, you did. You knocked on the one across the road, didn't you?
Yeah, so I'm doing
Are they
well.
friendly?
Yeah, she was, and she knew who you were.
Oh, did she?
Yeah.
I'm sure she does. Yeah, they probably get it all the time.
But we made it here, and there's, well, we're not sure if you're going to be able to hear this on the podcast, but there's a lot of digging up of the road going on outside.
Yeah.
So hopefully not, but...
No, you can. I've got the headphones on and I can definitely hear a hum.
So we apologise for that, and we hope that maybe they'll take a lunch break at some point soon.
Probably when we finish.
But we'll see how we get on. But yeah, thank you for inviting us to your place, Toby.
Well, thanks for coming.
And we're like cusp of Essex, Greater London. How would you define?
We're technically in Essex.
Okay.
So technically, Essex boy, born and
I
bred.
didn't know you could actually get to Essex on the tube.
Yeah, not many people do. So it's basically the stop before you got off, place called Buckerstill. That's Essex, and then every stop after that is Essex to Epping. But before that, when you're in Woodford, you're in the London postcode.
Okay.
Well, I saw a sign on the way for Chigwell, which birds of the feather, right?
Really?
Very niche 80s.
I know it as a Towie thing.
Oh, okay, right.
There's a lot of Towie was filmed around here.
Right, okay.
And you've got a lot of footballers living in Chigwell, and so there's that kind of that ilk.
But you're right near Epping Forest.
Yeah, right next to Epping Forest, which is great, and plenty of nature around, but only like half hour into Liverpool Street. So I love it. I think, like I was saying to you earlier, Tom, I've lived here in this area my whole life. I was born and raised here, and then was fortunate enough to be able to buy a place here a few years ago. And I love that balance of being able to get into London really easily, but also it not feeling much like London.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
Yeah.
So you grew up literally right in this area?
Yeah, literally. There's a street about 800 yards away called River Way. And that's where I grew up.
And have you still got lots of friends?
A lot of them moved away, but yeah, there's still a sort of steady contingent of school friends who are around, which is great. Yeah, I really like it around here. It's cool.
And while we're talking about school and that part of your life, what was your sort of journey in terms of like art and education? How have you ended up doing what you're doing now?
So I was never like especially academic at school, so I was a sort of like your standard B grade student across most things. But art I was always a little bit better at, and I always enjoyed it a lot more. But I was never sort of like, I certainly wasn't scoring like the highest grades or anything in art, by no means. If in fact I think probably, at school, like you always sort of told what to do, basically.
Yeah.
And I had that sort of relationship with my art teacher as well, whereby she would just sort of instruct you what you were going to be drawing.
Your first experience of art direction.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So yeah, and then, but I didn't really, at that stage, had no inkling or no idea that I would try and make a career of it. And in fact, I wouldn't say I had any idea that I'd make a career of it even after graduation. I didn't think that. I was always taught throughout university that the odds are stacked against you. It's super competitive, and you're probably not going to make it. They didn't say it in those terms, but that was the impression I got.
Yeah. That seems to be a common theme. A lot of people we work to or we talk to seem to go through the education process not really understanding or knowing or thinking they're going to be able to make a living from it.
Yeah, I don't can speak personally, but for me that was, in hindsight, was probably helpful because it was that sort of low-key anxiety of not thinking. That pushed me, I suppose. That made me sort of more conscientious, and I felt like any opportunity I got, I had to nail it. I had to really do the best job I could, and certainly when I was just starting out. And I was fortunate enough to get a little bit of work with Zizi, the restaurant chain. That was certainly the approach I had then. I was like, wow, this is just a ridiculous opportunity that I've got. I've got to nail it. I've got to do, there was no complacency there at all.
Yeah, we'll come back to Zizi because I'm quite interested in talking about that. But one thing we never asked, do we, Tom, is we never really asked people when we signed them, like, where they went to university or like, we're kind of interested in the here and now and the work that you're doing now. But so I don't even know, like, where did you study? What?
I was in Coventry.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I was there mostly because they gave me an unconditional. So that was great for me because it meant I didn't have to work anymore in sixth form.
Did you do like an art foundation or was it straight into
Yes,
degree?
so it was a conditional onto an art foundation, which actually was great because I didn't really know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to specialise in, and that gave me an opportunity to try a bit of everything, really.
It's such a good course.
I really do. I would recommend it to anyone.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of a little bit I got the impression it was a little bit looked down upon when I was, because most people go straight into their sort of specialised subject, but no, I thought it was great.
So this is the course you did, Tom, right?
Yeah, but I mean, obviously I'm much older. At the time, you had to do a art foundation to get onto a degree.
Right.
But yeah, for me, I went from A levels where I was just wasn't really enjoying it. You know, being told what to do, similar as you said.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you're surrounded by like 100 or so like-minded people. It was just kind of liberating. To be
Absolutely.
in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
And all the teachers were very inspiring, and absolutely loved it.
Yeah. And I think I was very fortunate, and that's, you know, if we talk a bit more about my career path, I think that's something that I feel is a sort of steady theme. It's one of good fortune. But when I initially went onto the course, and they gave me that unconditional, I think it was mostly because it was quite a new course.
Yeah.
So I think it was only a couple of years old in terms of
what was
Coventry.
the title of the course?
So I wanted to go onto the illustration course. And they said, well, your portfolio's not quite there for that. And then when I was doing the foundation course, they were just sort of, I was sort of thinking about maybe graphic design, and then I did graphic design and illustration, started on that after the art foundation. But then I changed again to illustration. But I think it was mostly just because, like I said, it was a new course, and so they were keen to have as many people sort of apply or get on board as possible.
It's funny how that when you sort of look at your life in those terms, how timing is so important, and luck, and also other people making arbitrary decisions on your behalf that just work out.
Yeah, for
in
sure.
a funny way.
And what's Coventry like?
It's all right.
Moving on.
No, Coventry, I mean, I loved it because I was at uni there. I think wherever you go to university, you love it because it's not about where you are; it's about the experience, you know. And like you were saying, Tom, meeting so many like-minded people. I think school is, especially around here, is very cliquey, and like, you know, there's very much popular people and then the less popular people. Whereas at university, I found myself mingling with people that, you know, at school you'd never necessarily come across.
Yeah.
And they were great. So it was sort of like, it was great for that. And you know, I think it was good mixture of sort of like nightlife and.
I've had a few nights out in Coventry.
Yeah. No, it's good.
So post university, obviously you've already mentioned ZZ's, which, like I say, I kind of want to talk about. But was there an in-betweeny bit where you were doing other jobs and like unrelated things?
Yeah. So I worked in a bar just down the road in Woodford for a while, and that was sort of like part-time. And then when I wasn't working there, I'd be doing sort of self-initiated work. And, you know, the usual thing, designing people business cards and that kind of stuff. Anything to try and get a foot in the door, really. Menus. I did a few menus for the bar.
Wedding invites?
Didn't do any wedding invites, no. But yeah, it was mostly sort of like business cards and stuff. And then whilst I was working that job is when ZZ saw my work. So basically, after I graduated, we went and did new designers exhibition down in Angel.
Oh, at the business centre.
Yeah. So we did that, which was kind of like initially a really exciting, like, this is where we're going to get all our clients sort of feeling. But it was mostly just sort of standing around for a week and not talking to anyone. Yeah. So that was quite sort of disheartening. But what I didn't realise was that that's where ZZ had seen the work I did.
And was it around that kind of time where you kind of began to realise that, you know, hang on a minute, actually what I'm doing is kind of gaining momentum? And
no, at that point I was pretty sure that nothing was going to happen. And then, you know, even when I got the approach from ZZ, I was still like, okay, like I said, my attitude was very much like, well, I've got to just absolutely nail it then. I've got to do, you know, go above and beyond.
So you went to work for them in-house?
Not at that point.
Okay.
At that point, they asked me to pitch on a new restaurant. So at that point, ZZ is an Italian restaurant chain, for those people that don't know. And they were going through this big refurbishment process. They had 150 odd restaurants across the UK, a lot of which needed refurbishing. And as part of that process, they were commissioning local artists or artists who have just graduated to create murals in the restaurants. And so that's what they asked me to do, was to pitch on a restaurant in St Paul's, One New Change, which I didn't win that pitch, but they really liked the work and they asked me to go and do one in Earl's Court instead. So that was my first ZZ project.
So you were in there physically installing a mural?
Yeah, which I'd never done before.
Okay, and did you tell them that, or did you kind of bluff it?
I think I probably would have told them that, but then what I did was my parents, who lived in a nearby town to here at that point, they had like a large shed in the garden, which is kind of like a summer house, I suppose you'd say, which had a wall that I could practice on. So I just bought like those big overhead projectors with like you put the acetate.
Yeah, on, you used to have assembly at school.
Yeah, like proper old school ones. I bought one of those on eBay and then just printed out my design on acetate and then practiced. So and then also asked other people as well online how. So there was other people who are known for doing murals and stuff. I reached out to those people and a couple of them replied and gave me some good advice.
But it is that sense of you're given that opportunity, you're going to make the most of it, find out how to do it, even though you didn't.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I was like, this is wicked. Like, I'd love to do something like that.
Yeah.
It was always quite scary as well because you don't want to mess it up. But as it happened, it all turned out okay. The only thing that I didn't take into consideration was that there'd be tables along the wall on which I was painting, and a lot of my design sort of sat underneath the table line.
Oh, okay, so it's like the equivalent of under the fold.
yeah, basically. So that was the only bit of feedback I got from the design director at the time. But luckily they liked the rest of it enough to ask me to do a few more. So it's sort of, I did one locally in South Woodford, and then I did one in Kenilworth, which is near Coventry, and I did one in there was loads of places.
And when was this?
That would have been 2012, I think, sometime around then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on a whim, I just asked the design director if they had anything sort of more permanent. And again, it's another one of those like, well, I view it as sort of very fortunate to have gotten in with a company who are super open-minded and were just like, yeah, go for it.
So at what point did you kind of then make that step to being a full-time freelancer?
So I was initially on like a 3-day-a-week contract at ZZ, and then eventually that would go to more sort of when we were doing a new menu or something, I would work full-time pretty much. And what was great about that, again, super fortunate, was that I was able to cherry pick a few projects that did come in from outside ZZ and work on those the rest of the time.
And they were fine with you.
Yeah.
Moonlighting.
Yeah, totally. So it also gave me that freedom to create the kind of work that I wanted to be creating in terms of self-initiated stuff as well. So the pressure was off in terms of like, I can't really afford to do self-initiated work. I could because I had this sort of steady income. And it was also at ZZ where I started first playing with lettering. So before then I was purely conceptual illustration. Like if you'd seen my work for what I was doing at university, there was no lettering in there at all really. And it was only through working at ZZ that I started getting to know lettering a bit more. And then I noticed that I sort of had a greater affinity for that than I did the other stuff because it just came more naturally to me.
So were you, so in terms of lettering, you don't have any formal training, but were you reading? Were you sort of researching?
Yeah, so I had I bought a few books, 2 in particular, which were quite sort of they informed my work a lot, and they were sort of specimen books for sort of Victorian style, so anything from like the 1600s to 1800s, and I just really fell in love with that sort of vintage aesthetic. So started doing a lot more self-initiated work like that, which then started getting noticed a bit more and gathered a small following for the lettering stuff, which and I think that I credit that with really kickstarting the career, because then I started getting more commissions for that sort of stuff.
And did you get to that? Because me and Tom kind of had this as well, but we got to the point because we had jobs and then we started Handsome Frank, and that started to grow. But there came a point where we had to make that step, which in hindsight was obviously a great decision, but at the time it was quite scary.
Yeah, it's a big step.
How did you go about that? And
that was difficult because I was so comfortable at ZZ, but I also was aware that comfort was not necessarily an especially healthy thing for my career. And there were certainly times where I was having to turn down projects outside of ZZ that I would have liked to take on because of the time commitment. As my role developed there, I had to dedicate a bit more time to that, to the brand. So, but also it sort of reached this point where after I designed the logo, that felt to me like the sort of pinnacle of, you know, and it was part of a wider rebrand as well that I sort of oversaw.
Sure, so that's kind of like the big job.
I felt like, you know, sort of, okay, completed it now.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but then it was kind of hard to move away because it's, you know, it's a great place to work, and ultimately it was, you know, everything was very cushy. But yeah, I think I reached a point where I think for both parties, you know, for ZZ as well, they needed someone fresh in who had some new ideas. And so it was time to sort of move on and go full-time freelance, which happened probably 5 or 6 years ago now.
Right. Okay. And never look back really in terms of.
No, I think
Can you imagine being employed again, or is it something you feel you could not go back to?
Well, I think I miss that sort of office environment sometimes, and that, you know, building rapport with other parts of a team. But equally, you get some of that when you have an agent as well, so that helps, and you do just get used to working on your own a bit more. So I'd never say like I would never go in house again, but it would have to be like, God, it'd have to be like perfect.
Yeah.
You know? Because otherwise freelance is just too, you know, it's too great what I've got now to chuck it away. So, but yeah, no, I think to answer your original question, it wasn't a case of like never looking back. I think probably the first couple of years or the first few years, there was certainly some sort of like prolonged, quieter periods where you're like, not sure actually whether this is.
Yeah, it can be very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and I think probably it's only really the last 3 years where that's not been the case, where I've not really had any of those quieter periods, and it's been sort of really steady, which is obviously very grateful for. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking, because fast forward a little bit, but we've been working with you since January. And I had a little look this morning. We've done 19 jobs in 10 months.
Pretty good.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah. Sweet.
So yeah, I mean, it feels like there's a real demand for your work. But I think what's really interesting with you is there is a broad appeal to what you do, because obviously you've got this lettering expertise, but it's also twinned with illustration. You can draw as well, and a lot of lettering artists just do lettering. And obviously there's a lot of illustrators out there, but you manage to combine the two, and I think that gives you a very broad commercial appeal. Yeah,
and I also think that you know, we've talked a little bit about self-initiated work, and we've also talked about how I was sort of entered into the industry with that attitude that this was going to be difficult, and I would have to really, you know, make the most of every opportunity. And I think what that bred was, every time I would undertake a piece of self-initiated work, I would always have that commercial appeal in the back of my mind. So I would always think about you know, how are people looking at this piece of work going to be able to see it applied commercially?
Yeah, I mean, this is a thing that Tom often comments on with student portfolios. You know, sometimes you see an image and it's technically fantastic and very aesthetically appealing, but where would it live in the commercial world?
I call it the logo test. Actually, I did a talk yesterday with LCC, and I was discussing this with them. I was like, if you do an illustration, just think like how many logos in the real world could you see on that illustration as an advert? I said, and the more logos you can put on there, in theory, then it's more the wider kind of commercial appeal it has.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it takes back to when we started, 10, 12 years ago. Everyone was drawing skulls, and that was a real big thing.
I feel really bad though, because actually I said that yesterday on the talk. I was like, if you just draw skulls, but then I have to kind of say, but if you do just draw skulls, it's okay, but
just make them really good skulls.
But you're just I don't know, the brands that come to mind that put skulls on their work, skateboard brands, maybe some whiskey brands, stuff like that. But it's quite limited sort of niche avenues.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's not to say that I suppose as a caveat to that, I was also very aware that my work was not like quintessentially cool enough to become like a trend in itself. So when I say that, I'm thinking about artists like Mary Farr, or I'm thinking about Malika, or I'm thinking about Kellyanna, or I'm thinking about people like Head Off, and they've got this style which actually is like could easily be seen as fine art, or you know, it's that graphic art kind of style which is just really really cool. And my work was never that, so I was always thinking, okay, so if it's not that, I need to think about what is going to make it commercially viable. How's it gonna, you know, do you know what I mean?
No, I think that's really insightful and really kind of I don't know, you're kind of being honest with yourself there, you know.
Yeah.
I would agree that because you don't really have a style as such. You can't look at a piece of work and think, well, that is, you know, that's definitely a piece of Tobias Hall work. But there are elements to your work that are consistent throughout your portfolio.
Yeah, I think it's the approach that hopefully ties it all together, which is that it's all sort of drawn by hand.
Yeah.
And feels of a sort of certain, you know, the idea is that it's a vintagey aesthetics, but then brought up to date in some way.
Just talking about process, tell us how you create your work.
Yeah, so originally it used to all be on paper.
Yeah.
I used to work, you know, sketch things out on paper, and then I would usually scan in those sketches, correct them in Photoshop, print them back out at a low opacity, and then go and do the fine, like, ink work over the top before then scanning in, and then colouring and texturing in Photoshop. But maybe 4 years ago, bought an iPad, and that means I can do all of that on the iPad. So even down to sketches and stuff.
Yeah.
There are obviously pencil-looking brushes which work great, and it means you don't have to. It's very easy to edit your sketches and transform the size of certain elements, and still have things on layers, so you can move things around really easily. And it's just a way quicker way of refining your sketch.
So how, in terms of changing your process and how long a piece of work takes you, I mean, what has the impact of that switch been? I mean, it's pretty significant.
Really significant, yeah, much quicker now.
Also,
And
location based. Are you happy to kind of work when you're?
well, I'm lucky that I've got a little shed down in the garden, which is where I work. So I've got a nice sort of separate area to the flat that I can work in. But yeah, it does mean you can essentially kind of go work anywhere, which is very handy.
Because I know recently we were working on a project together, and you were getting a flight, and I think you were working on the flight.
Yeah.
Which is mad, isn't it? Like, to think that you can, you know.
Yeah, well, that's it, and
time.
Obviously that would not have been feasible with the pencil and paper approach. But
yeah, just can you move across a bit? Look at my pens out.
You'd have to like pay for business class just for the.
I do remember one of our illustrators had like a travel scanner.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I can't remember who, but yeah, they used to always take their little travel
you can use
scanner.
a camera. You can sometimes, if you just steady, you can.
Yeah, well, that's what Michelle said on her podcast. That
Yeah.
she now, rather than scanning stuff, she just uses her phone camera.
Yeah,
they're just so good these days.
Yeah. But no, I think in essence, it's mostly the speed. But then because of that, it means you can spend that bit more time refining stuff at the earlier stages, and or pouring more time into the final artwork itself. So a lot of my work is quite highly detailed, so that certainly helps. Being able to spend the extra time, you know, getting those details right. Yeah,
and it's one thing I've like I said, we've been working together for 10 months, and one thing I've found really interesting is that not only the types of projects you're getting, but also the process. So to explain, it kind of feels like you're often brought in at an earlier stage than maybe some illustrators would be. And to explain that, you know, a lot of the projects we get, there's a brief, it gets sent over, it's for a specific artist, and they create what's in the brief. Whereas a lot of the projects we've worked on together, it's been a case of either an agency has been pitching for business, or they've been floating ideas and trying things out. So it feels like you're often approached earlier in the process, which I think comes with good points and bad points, but it probably allows you to have more of a say in the direction those projects take.
Yeah, I think that's probably driven by the type of work I do.
More brand related.
Yeah. So I do a lot of logos. Initially lettering based, but now more and more we were getting asked to do sort of illustrative logos.
Yeah.
And there's a few which, you know, I'm looking forward to sharing hopefully soon, but I can't talk about at the moment. But I think that's what drives that aspect of, you know, getting brought in at a slightly earlier stage, is that very often the client is or the agency is pitching, you know, an idea to the client, and they need to get sign off on it. So at that stage, so. And a lot of packaging stuff as well, and that's often the case with packaging as well. You know, illustrations for packaging. The stuff we've been doing recently for one of those alcohol brands, which we've almost been. They've had so many different iterations
I feel almost like you've worked in house in a way. You've always been a part of the brand team.
Yeah, and I like that as well, because I'm not someone who has ever been sort of scared of lending my opinion. I think it historically, certainly for the most part, the clients I've had have been really receptive to that. They've really liked the fact that I'm not scared to, you know, put my ideas across, even if they might slightly defy the original brief. Like if it, and I think that's fine. I think it's good to do that, as long as you're doing it in such a way as, you know, you're not. You're doing it properly, and you're doing it in a you know, a professional way.
I'd say that's probably from your experience of working in house, where you've kind of learnt that that's actually an okay thing to do, and you know how to deliver your opinion. Yeah,
I think it's also like an aspect of my personality as well, which is, you know, it comes with being somewhat of an anxious person in some walks of life, but it's that idea of control.
Yeah.
And it's certainly something, without getting into a therapy session, that I've had to sort of like, you know...
You can talk to us.
that I've had to sort of like work on a little bit, is that letting go of control. But also, it's nice to be able to have a say on projects, which, you know, I think Hans and Frank have spoken about this before, about, you know, listening to your illustrator and making sure that you're receptive to their ideas, because ultimately that's what you've hired them for. It's not just someone to do a drawing, it's someone who's, you know, got an idea about how it's going to work.
Well, that's it. You're hiring an expert. So in my opinion, if someone comes to you, you're not just a hired hand. You're there for your ideas, what you bring to the table, your experience, your problem solving. Yeah,
that's it. That's what it is. It's problem solving, and I think that's what my brain is especially good at. Two things. One is looking ahead and finding problems, which can be a bit more like difficult to manage. But the other thing is, okay, so what can we do about that? And that all feeds in again with that sort of like slightly, you know, I don't know if it's like an anxious or controlling thing, but it's about, okay, and very often I find that the brief hasn't necessarily considered about something that, you know, a potential issue or incompatibility in the future, or something which I'm then able to flag, and they can go, oh yeah, good shout.
It's interesting. I think one of the reasons me and Tom work well together as a team is that I'm similar mindset to you. So I'll look for problems.
Yeah.
Which can be a negative trait, but also you can kind of flip it in a work sense and use it to your advantage, and think, well, actually, you know, if that's where my head naturally goes, well, let's try and use that as a positive thing, and try and solve problems before they arise. Totally.
I think it's and again, going back to that mindset that I entered the industry with, which is one of sort of like, you know, it's, I suppose in some people would say that it's a slightly pessimistic mindset to enter the industry with, which is that this is going to be hard, I might not make it.
It might not work out. Yeah.
But that in itself was a fuel, right? Because as long as you're using that sort of, we'll call it anxiety, as long as we're using that in a positive way, and it's not too controlling in terms of, you know, affecting you in a negative way, I think it can be quite helpful in some ways.
No, I agree.
I think in today's age, I think graduates, that's a very, very common thought. One of the questions that was raised yesterday on that university talk that they asked me was, the course leader said, many of the students don't feel their work is good enough, for the industry. How can they make it?
Mm.
I was like, that's a really quite depressing
Yeah.
mindset to kind of go into. But I'd probably say that Instagram and all that kind of stuff has added to that.
Definitely.
Because they can just look at this kind of perfect stream of beautiful work, Behance, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then think, like, wow, like, how am I going to get to that level?
Yeah.
But if
And
you
that's a
look at
big
any artist who's, you know, doing great things right now, if you look at their work 5 or 10 years
they've
ago,
had a journey.
there's been a huge...
I was definitely that graduate. Definitely. I would look at like work, especially on Behance, because Instagram was less of a thing back then. But on Behance, I would look at that work and just be like, how on earth am I going to compete with this stuff? Like, how am I? But that is what ultimately I kept trying to do. So, and I think that's why I've had you know, the relative success that I have had. It's probably because I used that as something to sort of fuel me.
Aspire to, yeah.
But also, you know, there would have obviously also been a degree of recognition that gives you a bit of confidence to know that you're on something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that positive feedback, whether it be from clients or social media or wherever, that spurs you on. You've got to take confidence from that, and know, and also know when you're on the right path. Recognize when something does strike a chord.
Yeah.
And try and identify what it is about that you can replicate in the future.
Yeah. But nowadays it's more difficult because, well, Behance for one is just so saturated now. Like it's very, very difficult to get noticed. But that's not to say that,
because you've had a lot of success on that site.
Again, been very lucky to get featured a few times on Behance, and that I would say Behance is probably, you know, I credit it with the bulk of my early commissions would come through there.
And you get inquiries still. To
Yeah,
this day.
I still do now. Yeah,
I think one thing you've been able to do though, you're very good at, you know, once that project is done, just being able to display it very well, which I think for Behance is a really important. asset.
I would agree with that.
I think that's what I've got to say. Of all the artists we work with, you are probably the best example of somebody who is saying to me, "When's that out? Can I show it? I want it in my portfolio." And then you don't just kind of do a token post. You put together a really kind of well thought out case study, present it really well. You know, show your process. And I think that is as an example to any kind of aspiring illustrators, that's a really good thing to do in terms of promoting yourself. So well done you, because a lot of people don't do that.
Again, you can see some of that anxiety showing through in that. You know, it's like I keep calling it anxiety. That's a very strong word, but it's being aware that my work is what gets me work.
Yeah.
So if I can't show it, or if I don't show it off to, you know, the best of its potential, then I'm missing a trick.
Yeah, and we've had these conversations a few times where you've almost said, well, if this is a piece of work that wouldn't be allowed to live in my portfolio, I'm not sure I want to do it, because it's that important to you to have.
That's how I see it.
It's the shop window.
That's how I see it. I wouldn't take that approach to everything, but certainly if it's, you know, if it's like this amazing piece of like branding that for a really high profile client, but then they turn around and say, "Oh no, you'll never be able to show that."
Yeah.
Which is quite often the case.
Yeah, it happens. Yeah.
Then it's kind of like, right, well, I get the monetary aspect of still taking on the commission, but unless I can show people that I've worked on that, then the value of that job
is diminished.
It's diminished quite considerably, I would say. So I think presentation stuff is really important. The other thing I wanted to say, especially on the Instagram thing, is that it's also a horrible gauge for validity of your work, right?
Yeah, completely.
Like it's just the worst. Like Instagram now is just a crock of shit. So I think you have to. I think that's what I say. It's difficult to say how you get that confidence now, because Instagram will give you it in one post and then like rip it away from you in the next when you only get
it's not in any way a barometer of quality of work, you know.
Yeah, no, not at all, man. I think the most important thing is to create work that you enjoy creating, and I think when that's the case, the quality is naturally going to be good.
And are you still finding time for like personal projects?
Yeah, recently actually, because we're sort of in between jobs at the moment, waiting to get started on one. So I've just done a couple of self-initiated pieces.
I saw your piece about the fox.
Yes.
Looking out on this beautifully landscaped garden.
Oh mate, well, you can't see all the foxholes, but
So a fox destroyed your garden.
I'm in war at the moment.
Yeah.
With this fox.
I had a bit of a war with a fox in my garden last year when he murdered my guinea pigs. Yeah, that was fun.
Oh mate.
Yeah, we had to have a.
That's why I don't let Casper out.
Yeah, well, we had to have a funeral after school with the kids crying, and
mate.
yeah, it was great fun.
Shocker. No, I think so I did the garden in the summer. It was horribly overgrown and rubbish before then, and now I've transformed it into like this sort of like.
I saw it on Instagram. It looked great. It looks great in real life.
Semi-Japanese kind of peaceful mecca, but then this fox keeps coming in and just digging massive holes in it and weeing on everything and killing stuff.
Have you tried tiger poo?
What?
Apparently you can buy Have you heard of this? You can buy tiger poo on Amazon.
Yeah.
Tiger poo?
Yeah,
And then other animals smell it.
They're, what's the word? They're marking their territory.
They know there's a bigger animal.
Well,
would urban foxes be familiar with tiger poo though? Like,
I've not researched this greatly.
Talking of the bigger animal, the other thing that apparently you can do is wee in your garden.
Yeah, that's the one thing I've not tried yet. So, I mean, I'm getting desperate, to be honest, Tom.
Yeah.
It might happen.
Another cup of tea.
And I think it's best to be done on a day you're dehydrated.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know how we're going to bring this podcast back now.
This is a niche avenue. I've got a question. In terms of kind of, obviously you've worked with some amazing brands and projects already. Do you still kind of have a wish list of projects and clients that you want to work with?
Yeah, man. I would still love to do some work for Nike, although, I mean, I think that's probably, everyone says that, don't they? That's not very original, that one.
It's on a lot of people's hit list.
Yeah.
But deservedly so, I think.
Yeah. They do some pretty cool work. I would love to... do you know what I'd love to do? I would love to redesign the Glastonbury logo.
Ooh. Oh, do you know what? It badly needs to.
It would be one of those ones. It would be a disaster because although you could say that it needs redoing.
It's got such heritage.
It's too familiar to everyone,
yeah.
And also it's standing onwards, right? So it's not like it's been designed by nobody. But I would love to have a crack at that and just sort of like bring it on to date. What else? I'd love to do some more sports team logos. So I've been fortunate enough to do a few for Super League Rugby.
Yes.
And we've been asked to do some others. Again, one of which we can't talk about. But I'd love to do some more of that. Like for sports teams, I really enjoy that challenge of. That's something that's come into my practice a little bit more over the last couple of years. Is actually illustrative logos, but with far less detail. So something
bit more graphic
and where you've got like ideas distilled and simplified into the most simple terms. I've really enjoyed that challenge of like communicating something with immediacy and sort of I've really enjoyed working on those.
I think if it's a crest as well, and it's when you see how that is used across a sports team in every touch point, it's pretty cool to be
and I'm just a big fan of sport, so
and you're a Chelsea fan, right? Chelsea have redone their badge though quite recently, I think.
Yeah, it's a few years ago.
That'd be the dream job then, surely.
But I think they're all the new football ones are also boring, aren't they? They're just sort of like everything's been sort of distilled down into just flat, boring. That's like the trend, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, the recent backlash is that Puma aren't even using club crests.
I've seen that on some of their kits. They just write it along the
just
front,
says
don't they?
Man City.
It kind of looks like a fake kit. I think looks like one of those ones you find outside.
So maybe we'll come right full circle back to elaborate.
Yeah, I'd like that.
Crests.
I'd like that. You still see, again, one of the things projects I worked on this year for a pub chain is going back to that. It's a traditional woodcut kind of logo, but it's been brought up to date by the palette and by the rest of the brand kind of visual identity. So I think there's definitely a place for that, and I think it will come back around eventually, because all this simple flat design trend. I don't know. I just feel like you flush with personality out stuff. But
you mentioned color palettes there. I think you're very, very good at choosing lovely color palettes. Is that something? Where do you find them? Is that just sort of playing with the color palettes? Or?
I always thought a few years back, I sort of identified it as a bit of a weakness in my work.
Yeah.
I say a few. This probably would have been quite a long time ago now. So I sort of paid more attention to it. And initially I sort of took inspiration from other artists. I think Matt Taylor he's great with colours. He was one of the first people where I was like, wow, this guy really knows how to use colour. So I sort of looked at the different palettes he would use, but also rather than literally just copying the palettes, I would think about how he's using colour differently. And Malika's another great one for that, about how she does use black often, but she also replaces black with other colours, which I think was one of the first times I've seen that being done so well. And then more recently I've got a couple of books which are literally just dedicated to different colour palettes.
So Liquid History would be one?
Literally books that are just full of colour palettes, different colour combinations.
Yeah.
So there's two which I can't remember the names of, but I use those occasionally, and they're good to get sort of starting points and get ideas from, and then from there it's like, I see what. You kind of, after that you sort of piece it together yourself.
The first step on a journey.
Yeah, you sort of piece it together yourself and think like, okay, so then I can, just bring all that stuff together and then try and bring it into your own practice.
You worked for the Rolling Stones, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
Have you ever seen that the brief that Mick Jagger gave Andy Warhol?
Yeah.
I was wondering if for anyone that doesn't know,
mine was not like that.
Was it not? So there's a very famous memo or letter from Mick Jagger to Andy Warhol that says, Andy, we're thrilled you're doing the cover. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Ignore the record company.
Yeah.
And let me know what we owe you.
Yeah.
This is basically it.
Yeah.
So your brief wasn't like that.
No, it wasn't.
Was it from Mick?
It wasn't from Mick. Although I did get forwarded a piece of feedback from Mick.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So I didn't have any direct communication, but I did get forwarded a piece of feedback, which was that I had to give the tongue some more energy.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What was it?
So then we had to work out what that meant.
That's great.
Yeah. For those people that haven't seen it, it's an album cover for an album called Honk, which is a compilation album, and it's typographic in nature, but there is a tongue within the letter O of Honk. So we had to we tried a few different iterations of how that tongue would interact with the letter.
Because the story of the tongue is, I can't remember the ins and outs of this, but the person who designed the tongue was paid £50.
I think that's the story. Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not.
I did hear that
in the face of the Andy Warhol thing, isn't it?
Well, I did hear that in later years, somebody involved with the Stones bought them a house to say thank you.
Ah, that's
so it comes around. But maybe this is all urban myth.
Yeah, could be.
Cool client though.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. Yes. Again, that was another one of those where the whole process, I was like, well, they're not going to use this. They're just going to use a photograph because that's the easier thing to do, and they'll just show this to the record label and to the band, and then they'll say, no, we'll just go with the photo. So it was very much a case of like, I didn't think it would actually happen until I actually saw it, and then I was, oh wow, they've actually used it.
I think there's a lovely permanence as well to record sleeves. I'm quite into buying records, and every time I go to a record shop, I see your work, and
cool.
But yeah, it's really nice when you're flicking through and you see these kind of iconic covers.
Yeah,
always nice to work on.
I'm not sure mine's quite reached iconic status yet.
Yeah.
But no, I think you were, Rolling Stones, release a compilation every year, didn't they? So it's not. But it was very cool, and I still can't really believe it happened. So it's more of those as well, please. That'd be great.
So, in terms of career highlights, what else is right up there for you?
I think the ZZ logo was definitely one, which is probably a surprise to a lot of people. But I think that was again sort of like, I just never thought that I'd be able to work. At the time, it was such a like, whoa, this is so high profile for someone who's relatively fresh out of university, and I was just really proud of that. Other career highlights would be the work I did for Macallan, which is like a brewery.
Yeah, seen that on the beer pumps.
Yes, yeah, which was just nice to have had the chance to work on more than, so it was across 3 different beers, and also a logo to sort of umbrella all 3 of them. God, I hate being asked that question because you always forget everything you've ever worked on, don't you?
I just think most of your career highlights are yet to come.
Yeah, well, I think there's potentially one which we're not allowed to talk about yet in there. So, but that's probably up there as well. But no, I think actually the liquid history stuff, I really enjoyed that as a piece of work. The most recent Coburn's port stuff was really fun to work on. For me, it's like, the things I like most are when it doesn't necessarily have to be like the best piece of work, perhaps, but it's like when I've tried something new or I've pushed things again.
Yeah.
So thinking of that Coburn's project, which was these 3 illustrated cockerels, I think it was the first time I'd used colour and detail and style in that particular way, and I felt like it worked quite well. So that was kind of like, okay, cool, that's something I can.
Are you able to
back on as well?
When you look back at projects, are you able to separate the process from the finished work? And what I mean by that is that some of the artists we work with, if a project, even if it has great results and everyone's happy at the end, if the process was difficult, they kind of never fully like the work because they just have bad memories of what it was like to go through it. Or do you separate the two?
I don't think I've had that many projects that have been a nightmare. There was only one I can think of that was a real nightmare, and that was quite early on. That was like a illustrated logo. But
that's probably because
and the answer would be no to that one, because it did quite well on Behance and got me more work and stuff. So that sort of over.
I think sometimes that process of being art directed can be difficult, but ultimately it can lead to really interesting work if you're being pushed.
Yeah. Well, in this particular case, I was working direct with the client, so there was no agency or anything, and the client, as you would be if it was your thing, was just incredibly precious and wanted to see multiple options, and I didn't really have a contract in place because it was quite early on, and so I was just sort of like, it was just endless, basically. A
bit burned, yeah. One thing I've noticed actually, the kind of inquiries you get, there's a real breadth of like, you get projects from like huge multinational companies and big brands, but you also get these inquiries, tends to be through Behance and Instagram, into your sliding into your DMs. Just like, some one-man band setting up a new business that have just seen your work.
Yeah. And most of the time, the former is preferable, but I think there is a freedom that comes sometimes with if those one man band type setups can trust you with the process. The budget might not be so great, but that plays second fiddle because the creative process is so much more engaging and kind of like they're more receptive to your ideas sometimes, and because of that you can kind of experiment a bit more, and so I think there's no, I think it varies. Sometimes it works out really well, and other times it's more difficult.
I guess it allows you to also choose. You can, if it's a lovely inquiry from a new startup or something like that that you're really interested in, then you can get involved in it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One last thing I was going to ask you about is the lettering community, because obviously, like, I mean, the illustration community in itself is relatively small and a lot of people know each other, but within that there seems to be this smaller kind of lettering community that I don't know, that is there a secret handshake, like who invites you in? Everyone seems to know everyone. It seems to be, I know you speak to some of the other well-known letter and logo people.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's more just I started doing lettering stuff. I sort of caught the crest of that wave.
Yeah.
And that wave really got pretty big, right? So it's still very popular, but at one point it was just, there was just new lettering accounts popping up all the time.
There seemed to be a time where, especially in advertising, a lot of ad creative was just lettering. And I think we've moved past that a bit now. And yes. I think, again, that's one of the reasons why you're doing so well, is you've got the illustrative element to your work as well.
Yeah. I think there's still definitely a place for lettering, for sure. But I think, it's not, that wave is not as big as it was. But yeah, in terms of the community, I don't know that I'm necessarily the best person to comment on that. I think I'm probably a part of that, but not like intrinsically, or not. I'm certainly like friendly with people on Instagram who are part of that sort of.
There just seems to be,
but
to my mind, and maybe this is just my perception, but there seems to be sort of maybe 10, 15 people out there who are kind of at the top of their game, and most projects seem to go to somebody in that group. I think the bigger jobs. I
think there's definitely a community for like the traditional vintage style stuff, and especially those sign people who are, in the sign writing community. There's definitely a massive community and a really strong, cool community in sign writing. And certainly one of the people who made me decide that I wanted to do lettering was a guy called David Smith, who's sort of like the legend of sort of Victorian style lettering and glass gilding, and he's just insanely talented dude, and he has the way I view it anyway is that he has sort of like a selection of these sort of dedicated followers who are also really skilled practitioners, but they're all part of that nice kind of community vibe. But my work has always sort of straddled those lines, like you said. So I've never felt fully
in that
ingrained
world.
In that.
Yeah.
But I certainly like to watch from the outside and see what everyone gets up to. I think some of the work that these people create is just insane. So, but yeah, it's nice though. It's nice to be able to. I think that is one of the positive aspects of obviously social media, is being able to build up that rapport with people who share an interest or a passion in certain styles or.
I think if you could limit Twitter and Instagram to just being like, because I find it really useful as like a community tool to talk to peers, and that's great.
Yeah,
that's the best side of social media.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You've done a fair amount of talks in the past, haven't you? Design festivals.
Yeah, not recently.
No.
I'd like to do more.
Because of lockdown.
Obviously, I suppose, for obvious reasons.
Is that something you're looking forward to getting back to?
I'd like to. Yeah, I'd like to do more.
Do you like genuinely enjoy them, or do you have that kind of dread?
No, they're horrible.
So you have the love-hate relationship.
But it's nice afterwards.
Yeah.
That's what we would say.
And that's when if you get asked to do another one just after you've done a talk, that's the danger zone, because you're like, talks are amazing.
Yeah.
And then you say yes, and then you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed doing them. I don't know if I'm any good at them, but I've certainly enjoyed doing them. I think that when I first met you was at
in Bucharest.
Bucharest, wasn't it, for Visual Playground?
We should say hi to those guys.
Yeah.
Because they're all lovely.
Yeah, big ups, Visual Playground. So and that was I was just like doing some I was like master of ceremonies, wasn't I? Which is silly really, but it was fun. But yeah, I'd like to do more stuff like that. I've done a couple. I've gone back to Coventry Uni to do a couple there, and I've gone to Bristol Uni a few times to do like talks and workshops there. and then I've done Visual Playground a couple of times. But I'd love to do more, and I think it's quite rewarding. I think like the first one I ever did, which you weren't at that Visual Playground, but they said I could talk about whatever I wanted to, so I just talked about mental health for an hour, which is really, really scary because then you're like, wow, they don't even want to hear this stuff. Like they just want to hear about your work. But I was kind of like, I think there's definitely a place for people talking about their career paths as we've just done. But I think when you go to a talking event and it's literally just one after another, then it can be a little bit kind of monotonous. So.
Yeah, it's like, here's a project we did.
Yes,
here are
exactly.
the initial sketches.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I just threw all that out the window. And fortunately, it went really well, and everyone was very friendly and kind afterwards. And
well, it probably completely
super helpful
cut through the ice and stood out from all the others.
Yeah, well, I think also it's something that a lot of creative people, well, a lot of people in general, but creative people especially, can struggle with that stuff. So
I completely agree, and I think also the value of something like Visual Playground. I mean, it's a massive privilege to be able to take time out and go and travel somewhere and experience something. But for me, speaking was part of it, but actually just hanging out with really interesting people for 2 or 3 days is a huge part of it.
Yeah, so cool. Like the first one I went to, Malika was there, and it was just like, cool.
It's quite restorative. I mean, Tom did off one year, and it's you come back feeling really like restored and.
That's just an escape from the children, though, isn't it?
Maybe, probably just a couple of days away from the family, but
work trip. It is a work trip.
I really miss that, and I think there's an energy you get off just being in a room with people, and also putting a face to some of these people you talk to over social media.
Yeah, and for me as well, I was on a roster of people that I just really looked up to, so it was just really cool to be able to hang out with these people and not even talk shop, but just like get to know them a little bit as people. And the same applied when you were there as well in that following year.
If there's any event organisers listening and you're short of a speaker or two, email John.
If you,
I did actually accept an invitation to speak yesterday, Tom.
I haven't replied to that yet.
So we'll get back to that. But
I'd love to know that. I think it's fun, and if it means I get to travel a bit as well,
it's a bonus.
Everyone's sort of really needing that now, aren't they? So, yeah.
I also think it makes, it certainly does with me, whenever I have to write about, think about and talk about Handsome Frank, it makes me actually go back and think about things we've done in a way that I haven't previously done. So I have to actually kind of reverse engineer how we've ended up doing what we're doing and think about what I'm doing more than ever. And you probably wouldn't do that unless somebody asked you to do a talk about your process or your company.
Forced reflection, isn't it? I think it's just sort of fun and fulfilling in a lot of ways. I certainly find it that way. So yeah.
We're going to let you go shortly.
Cool.
I was going to ask you one more thing. I know you're quite a keen cyclist. You run a lot. I just wondered. I mean, this might be completely separate from work in your head, but is part of that like a work mechanism? Is it a way? Is it a thing you do to help with clearing your head or to get inspiration, or is it completely separate?
I think it crosses loads of stuff. I think fundamentally, like running stuff, I just quite enjoy it. I'm not a good runner. I just like to get out, and it's just nice to sort of leave your phone at home and not look at a screen for a couple of hours.
Do you get obsessed with running times, statistics?
No, I used to.
Yeah.
I used to have quite an unhealthy relationship with running, where it was all about like PVs. What are people on Strava going to think of my time. But now I've got a much better relationship with it, where it's more just it's a tool for me to stay relatively healthy. I think it definitely helps from a mental health standpoint. And working at home, being on my own for the bulk of the day, certainly helps just to get out and sort of like burn off a bit of restless energy that can sometimes crop up, and go see something, especially the cycling, like around here. Essex
you're
really
in a beautiful spot, yeah.
So you can just
Epping
get out.
Forest?
Sorry?
Is it Epping Forest?
Yeah, Epping Forest is amazing for cycling
Got
as
your
well.
gravel bike.
Yeah, I've got the gravel bike.
Nice.
So yeah, I think it's certainly, I'm sure it does help with work as well. You know, if it helps, it certainly makes me feel more kind of like that satisfied, tired feeling that I think.
Do you think about work when you run?
No,
Do you not?
No.
I really do.
I don't think
Really?
so.
Yeah.
I think about DIY. Seriously, if I get out of breath, I'm like, right, I'm going to now think step by step how I'm going to build this wardrobe.
Nice.
And it's that distraction of mind, I think, that really helps.
Yeah.
That's why I like trail running as well, because you're not thinking about, my legs. You're kind of thinking, right, looking where you're going. Kind of.
Yeah, I think it's quite insightful as well because, you know, I don't know what I really think about when I'm running, but I know that I have, you know, I might experience the same sort of negative thought patterns as I would have when I'm not running.
Yeah.
But when I'm running, they just sort of bounce off. And I find that insightful because it's kind of like, this is the same thought as I had earlier in the day that really affected me.
Yeah, but you've got a mechanism to dismiss it.
But it's kind of quite insightful to recognise that sort of nature of thought is just bits of noise, and like it's all about perception really. And so yeah, I think it's great. And again, that's another thing. It's a really cool community, and
yeah, and there's a few runners and cyclists within our agency, and
Yeah.
it's also a lot of clients. A lot of designers seem to be really into it. I've noticed. Maybe it's just a middle-aged
probably
thing.
it's probably a middle-aged thing. Yeah, but no, I love it. It's great.
Well, thank you for having us. We're off to try and solve the fox problem now.
Yeah,
By I don't know.
we're just gonna stake out. I think just
Not my suggestion.
yeah, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Cool.
Goodbye.
Bye.
And if you'd like to know more about Handsome Frank Narratus, check out our website, handsomefrank.com.
Thanks very much for listening.
Handsome Frank. Handsome Frank.